The National Galleries of Scotland learned today that cutting down trees, even with planning permission, can prompt a furious response from the public. 50 trees have been felled in Princes Street Gardens to improve disabled access. But the decision hasn't gone down well with locals, with someone calling it desecration, others calling it ecological vandalism. David Cowan reports.
Here are the gardens before and after. Over 50 trees axed for the redevelopment of the Scottish National Gallery in Edinburgh. Planning permission was first granted back in 2016. The City Council agreed they should come down, but now that it's happened...
So I'm actually shocked. I think it's just desecration of what was a beautiful site there with the existing trees. So I think it's absolutely shocking.
Oh, I am angry about it, and I think if I had stumbled upon it without knowing in advance, I would have been wrecked by it. I think it's deeply upsetting.
It's just ecological vandalism by the council. I mean, it is not necessary to remove all these trees.
The National Galleries of Scotland say the trees have made way for a new path, which will make the gallery fully accessible for people with mobility impairments, prams and pushchairs. There was support for that today, but regular users say it's still an own goal.
Increased access, disabled access, I'm not going to argue against that. I just wonder why they had to take out so many trees and mature trees, and why they couldn't kind of work round what was there.
One man was making a personal record of each stump.
I'm very fond of trees. My gut feeling is this is a disaster. It's a real loss. There's already a path here in place that's smooth enough for any disabled access or buggies.
The galleries say the existing path is too steep. 22 large saplings and semi-mature trees will replace the ones that have gone. Critics are regarding this as an Edinburgh Chainsaw Massacre. The National Galleries is saying their decision to do it wasn't taken lightly. The new trees will be planted in the spring. David Cowan reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Okay, convener. We could reconvene. Move on to item 7.3. Two applications, an A and a B, a planning permission and a listed building consent. Both concern the National Gallery of Scotland at 1 The Mound in regards to alters and extensions to form new and improved service, pedestrian access, landscaping, public realm and other works to achieve improved connections between galleries, gardens and the city beyond. Here from the planning officer.
Good morning. The subject of the application which I'm considering today is the National Gallery of Scotland. The application proposes alterations and extension to the 1978 Property Service Agency wing with adjoining interior alterations to the Scottish National Gallery and the 2004 Western Link, new and improved service and pedestrian areas, landscaping, public realm and other works to achieve improved connections between galleries, gardens and the wider city. The first three images set the context of the site. The first image is an aerial view showing the context of the site in relation to other buildings and to East Princes Street Gardens. To the north lies Princes Street and the Royal Scottish Academy. To the east lies East Princes Street Gardens. To south and west is the Mound. A railway tunnel runs directly underneath the Scottish National Gallery. The location site plan outlines in red the area where changes will be made. It includes not only the galleries but also part of the Mound and into the gardens. These improvements will be delivered as part of the application. The view is taken from the Scott Monument. It is one of the most prominent views of the whole site. It shows the Scottish National Gallery on the left, the Royal Scottish Academy on the right, East Princes Street Gardens in the foreground with a distinctive wooded valley in the foreground, the castle framing above. It's set in a prominent elevated position on the west side of East Princes Street Gardens. The National Gallery complex consists of two internationally significant buildings by the architect William Playfair, the Royal Scottish Academy and the National Gallery. Both buildings were designed in the Greek Revival style. These proposals primarily concern the National Gallery of Scotland, originally designed in 1850, but with later alterations. Also, the Property Services Agency wing in 1975. The two galleries were linked in 2004 by John Miller and Partners in the Playfair project. This is known today as the Western Link, and they provide a garden-level entrance to Princes Street Gardens. Both the National Gallery of Scotland and the Royal Scottish Academy are Category A listed. They both lie within the Edinburgh World Heritage Site and both the Old and New Town conservation areas. They also lie within a registered garden and designed landscape, that is the Newtown Gardens. This image is the same view as the one we have just seen. It is of an earlier consent that was approved by committee. This will be of interest to the current planning committee as the view relates to the consent granted in September 2016. The scheme proposed extending the Scottish National Gallery at lower level by 5 metres into the gardens, bringing the elevation into the same line as the adjacent 2004 Western Link. It was requested by the convener that I mention the previous consents. Right. So I'm just going to show one image, and I think it's relevant to refer it back to the previous image so that we're looking at the previous consented scheme as well. For operational and technical reasons, this scheme could not be implemented. Committee are now asked to consider the current applications put before them. One of the principal aims of the proposal is to rehouse the current Scottish art collection, which is currently housed in the lower level of the Scottish National Gallery. These areas have actually recently been decanted into storage. The works concern 3 areas within the complex: the Scottish National Gallery, as I've said before, the 1978 Property Services Agency, PSA wing, and the more recent Western Link, built in 2004. These are, the current proposals are a reduced scope of works to the recently consented schemes, and specific elements of the proposal have been revised. There are 2 main changes: the omission of the gallery extension of the PSA wing into Princes Street Gardens, and the retention of the small internal north stair connecting the Western Link to the Scottish National Gallery. The existing glass and bronze facade of the PSA will be removed as part of the works. This will be replaced by a new facade consisting of stone and glass. I'll show images of the new design later on, but the glass and stone wall would be articulated by a large picture window at the point to which it joins Gardens entrance. One of the objectives of the proposal is for 2/3 of visitors to the galleries to use this new entrance. At the moment, the entrance to the galleries, both the RSA and the Scottish National Gallery, is mostly through either the Gardens entrance by the Western Link or either on the Mound, which becomes very congested. So one of the drivers for this application is to get most of the visitors in through the Gardens entrance. The scheme has a wider scope of work and proposes new and improved service and pedestrian access, landscaping, public realms and other works to achieve a showcase for Scottish art, and improved connections between galleries and gardens. The presentation addresses both the planning application and the listed building consent application together in one presentation. The first part of the presentation relates to the alterations to the interior spaces. I'm mindful that the committee have got a very tight schedule this morning, so I'm going to go through the photographs and images of the internal spaces quite rapidly, and if you have any questions, please ask me questions at the end. The first image is of the distinctive suite of galleries on the ground floor, which, as you'll know, if you go into the ground floor galleries, you're presented with it by a suite of octagonal rooms. These are not being altered, but the small staircases at the north and south of this ground floor plan reach small galleries at upper floor levels, and these are the subject of small alterations. There is a staircase at the southeast corner here, which will be removed as part of the works. All these alterations to the interior are supported by a comprehensive heritage impact assessment submitted by Simpson & Brown, who are Edinburgh-based conservation architects. So I've had a lot of supporting information in determining these internal operations. The current route to the Scottish collection can be viewed at the end of the gallery. The door is a 1980s construction, is off-centre. The plan is to remove this door, which is later, and make it more centred. The new door would be an improvement, and the 1978 staircase would be removed behind it. At the moment, the only access down to the Scottish collection is via this staircase. Gallery 1 at the first floor is above the entrance door, and the image we can see is of a screen which disguises a lift. This is obviously a modern intervention. This is going to be removed, and it is going to the other side of the room. This is Gallery 1, which is immediately as you enter the gallery from the mound at first floor level. The new lifts are not just for passengers. They will also be used for art handling and will improve accessibility and connectivity in the galleries. This is the area immediately you enter the galleries from the mound. This will be, it's the existing shop. It will be opened up, and this will become a new cafe area. The Western Link Cafe, which I understand is operated by Contini's, is still going to remain in situ, but this will be the main cafe for the galleries at upper level. This is a picture of the 1978 existing stairway to the Scottish collection. This was undertaken by the Property Services Agency in the late 70s. It's recognised as a good quality work, but it will be removed and recorded. The staircase is of good quality, but it's not fit for purpose at the moment, so we are accepting of its removal. This is a photograph of the previous layout of the Scottish collection. This area has now been decanted, but it was extremely hard for anyone to actually reach, and the galleries did research and discovered that only 20% of visitors to the galleries actually made it down to the Scottish collection, which was housed at the lower ground floor level. So they want to improve that greatly. And then just to reiterate that it should be established that one of the main objectives of the project is for 2/3 of visitors to use the new entrance to be accessed from the gardens level, which will improve the popularity and accessibility of the expanded Scottish art collection. This porch door is the entrance you would use if you're coming in from the mound. This is also a later addition. This will be removed and, I believe, stored on site. This will open up this area for better circulation space. The key considerations of the applications are the heritage impact. Obviously, they're Category A listed buildings protected by World Heritage Site status within 2 conservation areas and also protected landscape. The applications also consider the impacts on landscape, the impacts on trees, and the impacts on views. The last part of the presentation has before and after views of the proposals in terms of photo montages for the committee's consideration. On to the new proposals. The existing elevation to East Princess Street Gardens is displayed here in this image in its entirety and runs from, as I'm looking at it, from left to right. The 1978 Property Services Agency wing, this will be removed. The structure to the right, which is the 2004 Western Link. They both sit under the Mound complex at Gardens level. This image shows the demolition works, highlighted in red. There are additional demolition works proposed to the railings, which are not permanent, but I understand are for the construction period, and the railings will be removed and then replaced. The slide also shows the demolitions in their entirety, including the works to the Western Link. At the moment, the access into the Western Link is via a revolving door. The galleries have found that this is not an acceptable method for visitors to use, and they want to remove this later entrance and replace it with a series of opening doors. There are also alterations proposed to the steps at the foot of the mound. As you come in from Princess Street, there are two staircases which will be altered to form a wider entrance from the new Princess Street precinct. So that, in essence, is, concerns the demolition at this level, on this elevation. The next slide is the proposed elevation to East Princess Street Gardens. So there is a series of images here of existing, the demolitions, and then the proposed works. So it's recognised that the 1978 Property Services Agency extension was controversial at the time. However, it does seem to have been successful. It's quite a quiet response to both the gardens and the galleries above. It's reticent in its design, and it's worked well. The architects came up with lots of different options for a design solution, and this is the one that they have put forward, which we are supporting. And it proposes a suite of rooms which will house the new Scottish art collection. And there will be a series of both glazed windows and blank windows onto the East Princess Street Gardens. Moving right into the centre of this image, there are 5 smaller windows, 5 blank windows, and to the right, which is sort of centred on this image, is a large picture window, which will be the focus point for the new Scottish Art Gallery. Moving further towards the Western Link, we can see the new set of doors replacing the revolving doors. Not many. Yeah, okay. This drawing shows part of the new facade, which will replace the bronze PSA extension. For interest, the windows are relatively modest. They're 2.7 high, 1.5 wide. The large picture of window at the end is much wider. It's 8.3 metres wide. The windows will afford views into the gallery as well as views out to exploit the new gallery space. The railings above will be retained as part of this scheme. This is a detail of the stonework which shows display and blind window recesses. It adds interest to this elevation and will be drove stone in finish and similar in finish to the 2004 Western Link. The windows have a regular rhythm and a strong verticality. Moving on to the landscape implications, the landscape design can be broken down into 4 component areas: a new public space at Princes Street and Mound level, improved connection between Princes Street and the Western Link, a new terrace in front of the Western Link, and a new improved footpath connection between the Western Link and the foot of the Playfair Steps. The architects have provided comprehensive landscape visual impact assessment as part of the proposals. This is a close-up of the new landscaping scheme. Part of the challenges for the architects, who are the same as the original team for the 2016, they are Hoskins from Glasgow, is that the grass banks were very steep, so the new proposals address this and have carefully designed hard and soft landscaping proposals. To the bottom left of the picture, there is a new piazza being created around the John Wilson Monument, which is as you come in from Princes Street entrance. A widened staircase down to the Western Link and new paths, and both hard and soft landscaping. Again, these will probably be explained better by the before and after images at the end of the presentation. This is the southernmost view of the landscaping proposals. There's an existing Spanish memorial, war memorial, and that will remain in situ on the path. The application is accompanied by a comprehensive tree survey. So having touched on landscaping, I'm going to move on to briefly talk about trees. There are 39 trees worthy of retention on the site, and they've been categorised in Category A and B in the tree survey. They're being removed to facilitate development. A further 11 trees of lower quality are also being removed. These are mostly young trees. 22 trees are being planted as part of the replacement planting. This is acceptable because the replacement of all trees would be inappropriate with a new layout. The final selection of trees will be developed in consultation with the council. There have been ongoing consultations with the Parks Department, who are fully supportive and wish to be involved in ongoing selection of trees, planting, and also maintenance. We also have a very detailed tree protection proposal. This is going to indicate how the trees will be protected on site, and I have added sufficient conditions to ensure further details are provided, again to be discussed with ourselves. Currently, the trees contribute to the designed landscape and are an important component of the picturesque landscape setting for the galleries and the gardens. The loss of these trees will have an impact on the landscape in the short term until the new replacement trees are able to provide the new setting, allowing new and managed views to the building. Some of the trees in the gardens, their removal is desirable, as some of them are over-mature and no longer provide the desired and intended setting for the buildings and the galleries complex. The removal of the proposed trees will improve these views and would be moderately beneficial. Just to finish, I have quite a few views before and after, which I will show you. This is one you've seen already. It's the most prominent view of the site, and it is taken from the Scott Monument. So this is existing, showing the recessive existing 1978 PSA wing on the left. The next one shows the proposed work. Whilst the removal of the trees will change the views to the building, the principal arrangement of the natural and designed environment, that is the wooded valley, will be unchanged. Tree removal will reveal the facade of the portico of the gallery above. The impact of the setting for the galleries and the castle will be minor. This is a view from North Bridge. Little is visible because of the presence of the trees which obscure the galleries at this level. This is the view from North Bridge as proposed. Again, the removal of the trees changes the views, but will reveal the portico of the gallery. This view is completely hidden from public view at the moment. For the committee's consideration, the agents have provided night views, since night views are very important part of this scheme. This is taken from North Bridge and is existing. The light pollution that you can see at the moment, in fact, is not the gallery's complex. I understand it is light. It is the light pollution from Waverley Bridge. And proposed, you've got the existing lights on Waverley Bridge, and then behind them you can see the new windows from the new elevation. This will extend the lit part of the complex below the plinth. In a similar manner, the Western Link is highlighted below the Royal Scottish Academy building. I understand that the galleries will be using blinds at night time, and the levels of light output will be able to be controlled. This is a view from the mound as existing, again showing a lot of tree cover to the right of the railings, so that they sit immediately in front of the PSA wing. This is with the trees which sit in front of the wing being removed. It shows the extended new precinct in the distance by the John Wilson statue, the new extended staircase, and the new network of paths and grassed banks. The existing view will be removed, opening up views to the gardens. This proposal involves removing the clutter from this particular area, including the walls, the existing toilets, and they will improve the quality of the public realm and increases views into the gardens. This is the existing view with the John Wilson statue behind, and I think it's a plane tree on the left. We're removing the grass and proposing hard landscape and creation of a new precinct, as we have in this image. Again, with the John Wilson statue, the plane tree on the left, demountable railings, because we have to be mindful that the gardens are used a lot for festivals. This image also shows the stone markers for the gallery. I've got two more images. One is taken from the southern path, which is the view of the existing bronze PSA extension, and the proposed view from the southern path with the new stone and glass facade, retaining the Spanish memorial on this path. The final two images are taken from North Steps as existing and proposed. This shows the new terrace, the new extended staircase leading down to the existing Western Links terrace, the marker, and to the right will be the new Princess Street precinct. In the foreground, you'll see the new grassy banks and newly designed paths. In summary, the application complies with the development plan and non-statutory guidance. On balance, the proposals have no adverse impact on the architectural integrity and composition of the building, ensuring its special character is preserved. The proposals will not impact on the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site or on the character and appearance of the conservation area. The proposal will ensure the long-term use of this internationally important Category A listed building. The proposed conservation-based approach to this project results in significant wider conservation benefits. The public realm and new alterations are an enhancement to East Princess Street Gardens. It is recommended these applications are granted, subject to appropriate conditions and informatives. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. So who would like to ask officers some questions before we go into debate? First, Councillor Mowat, second, Councillor Staniforth.
Thank you, Diana, for that.
Hello.
Very full description. You mentioned in the presentation that it would improve the link for the Playfair steps.
Yes.
I assumed that was going to be an alteration where you can currently connect up from the south path and up the steps at the back.
Yes.
But there doesn't seem to be any changes to that. Is that just...
I think we are just, with this scheme, we are just maintaining the path and improving that link. So the main changes to the area in front of the galleries will be the creation of an extended terrace with tables and chairs. We are conscious that the new terrace isn't that popular, perhaps, intervention into the gardens, and so we have asked for a condition to be included so that we have control on the amount of space that's actually used, but of course it will be subject to separate licensing.
Might be worth, could you just read that condition out for the committee?
Yes, I can. It's actually it's informative 11, and it just states, before development takes place, the applicant shall provide details of a clearly delineated space to be identified in which tables and chairs for the gallery's cafe operations can be placed to allow management of this space for diners and pedestrians accessing the area.
Thank you for that. So committee may consider whether they wish to make that a condition. We'll discuss that afterwards. So Councillor Staniforth, then I saw Councillor Mitchell.
I have two completely unconnected questions, if I may. The first one is, you mentioned the removal of toilets. Doesn't that represent a reduction in amenity that the site provides?
Sorry, that is something that I have discussed on site with the agents, and they have. There is an agreement with the galleries to allow public access to their toilets.
And the second one was there is a very significant reduction in the number of trees on the site.
Yes.
I accept the idea that that 22 is what's necessary for the area. I was wondering if the committee should so choose, would it be possible to add a condition that the deficit be made up by replanting elsewhere in the city?
I'm going to ask my colleague Julie Waldron to answer that, who's the landscape architect.
Well, if that's something the committee would like to do, then that's a very interesting idea. We obviously agreed there are some very young trees that are being removed, and then very few of the larger trees are coming out. So that was what we considered a reasonable balance. But if you wish to do that, then I'm sure they'll be welcomed by the Parks Department.
Can I just follow on? You need to be sure that the condition met the tests of the circular in terms of being related to the development. So it would have to be something that mitigated the loss of those trees. We couldn't just say put them elsewhere in in the city that didn't have a direct link to the application in front of us.
I think Councillor Mitchell, you're next, and then Councillor Booth, and then Councillor.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Ms. Garrett, for your presentation. Very similar to what Councillor Stanforth was talking about. I do have concern about the removal of the number of trees being removed and then not being returned there. I mean, obviously, you described it as a wooded valley, I think, and now it does seem quite an open space now in what is obviously quite a sheltered section previously.
One thing we should point out is that the visuals were done, they're usually done with the trees about 10, 15 years old rather than the full mature trees. So what the landscape architect's done is he's looked at the species of the trees that are coming out, the sycamore, and there is a lime, and that's typical of this sort of picturesque type of landscape, particularly Crimean lime, which is slightly different, and he's putting those back in a different form, and he's also introduced a fastigiate tree, one that goes like that, because that's actually typical of this type of landscape. So he's done a lot of historic research into the background of the picturesque and the history of the development of the gardens. And in that way, he's actually trying to define new views which haven't really been done in the current planting. As you'll see, there's clusters of very young sort of flowering rowan type trees and cherry type trees. But if you're actually looking at the historical research that he's done, they're looking for slightly larger oaks and limes and something that's more what we'd call round crown, mature, big scale trees. They're actually more appropriate to the landscape. So in that way, because of the research that he's done and he presented to us, we were quite comfortable with the numbers and types of trees that they're putting back, which is, if we were to put them all back, if you like, it would almost slightly, in the future, not now, not immediately, but in the future, the views might again become quite enclosed, which is what we're trying to do, is open them up to these temples, if you like, sitting with their quiet plinths in this whole sort of landscape valley. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay, great. Councillor, an interesting point there, indeed. Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Convener, and I'm going to continue the theme, I'm afraid, with trees. Perhaps I've misunderstood the report, but on page 17, it says that the volume of tree planting currently on site will be replaced in the proposals with new tree planting. Obviously, further up, it specifies the numbers. It says, I think we're taking out around 50 and putting back 22. Is that correct? But further down, it says, because of so the volume of tree planting currently on site will be replaced in the proposals with new tree planting. The drawings provided do not reflect on the discussion about replacement tree planting. Blah, blah, blah. These trees will either be planted as part of the comprehensive scheme proposed or used to supplement tree planting and management elsewhere in Princes Street Gardens. So my reading of what is proposed in that paragraph is that you're effectively saying you expect around 50 trees to be planted. Those that are not replanted in this specific area should go elsewhere in Princes Street Gardens. I think that is something that, as a committee, certainly I would support. I don't know whether fellow members of the committee would. I do think it, following on from Alison's point, it obviously has to be pertinent and relevant to this application. But I think it is relevant. As Max said, this is a wooded valley. If we're taking trees out of this area, for perhaps good reason, to be consistent with this application, I think we should consider whether there's elsewhere within the wooded valley that we can locate them. So I suppose my question is, have I misunderstood that paragraph? Is there an intention to replant, if not in this location, then elsewhere in Princes Street Gardens?
This last paragraph seems to be a misrepresentation of what's actually intended, because we have worked quite closely with the agents and landscape designers and to achieve a satisfactory planting scheme and replanting scheme in conjunction with Julie. This is something that was raised with the recent application, which was granted in 2016. Committee were very very interested with what was happening with the trees. And so we have very carefully we have assessed this with quite a degree of scrutiny. The tree survey has included detailed species identification for all the trees. I think this may have been left over from the last report, but it is a misrepresentation for this current proposal.
Yeah, I would sort of have some concern, notwithstanding Councillor Staniforth's point about replanting elsewhere in the city. I think that any trees that would go into the gardens, and it may be redundant from what you're saying, but any trees that would go into the gardens should be carefully considered as a whole landscape strategy for the gardens.
Yes, I mean that's a very good point. Obviously, there is a management plan for the whole of Princess Street Gardens, and our Parks Department will be looking after the gardens in a particular way. I think perhaps it's a small slip there, because we've gone further than we had in the last application. So we've obviously gone right down to species level. And we were very particular with the type of species that we wanted them to do, and there were discussions with the Parks Department on that. And that's why I think we are comfortable with the planting plans that we have. We have conditioned certain aspects of the landscapes because both hard and soft. So we want conditions on the tree pit details, for example, and we want conditions on the exact materials for the hard works, and we want exact materials for the slope of the grass, because that was mentioned, very steep grass slopes. It's unusual. It's quite difficult. In the the Modern Art Gallery, you'll see some of those slip and fail. So we've been working hard to try and get things that's why we've conditioned all the underground, the grass materials. So this is why you'll see in the report there's quite a lot of landscape conditions, even more than you would normally get, because normally if we had a planting plan of this detail, we probably wouldn't need any more conditions. But because of the sensitivity of the site, we've added those conditions.
But if I may be permitted as supplementary convener, that's all very welcome, and that's great to hear. Thank you very much. And I absolutely take on the convener's point that we shouldn't be putting in a condition or an informative that just says we have to plant more trees, because obviously it has to be appropriate. This is a highly sensitive area. It's the views are extremely valuable and so on. But I just wonder whether it's possible to put an informative in that we consider, in close collaboration with the Council and Parks and Green Spaces, whether tree planting within the wider Princess Street Gardens could be considered. I think I wouldn't want to make it any stronger than that, but I think that at the very least considering it, bearing in mind that the overall number of trees and in particular the maturity of them, there will be some lost here with good reason. The overall application is strong, but I do think that an informative to ask that consideration would be appropriate.
In dialogue with the council's landscape architect, and that so we would be able to determine what's wholly appropriate and not necessarily the developer. Though I understand that their position is in the right place, perhaps, but I think that we should control how it develops, and so it links to our overall landscape strategy for the gardens. Of course, we're still in the question session, so I'm getting nods, but I would like to throw that back to the committee. But now, just to wrap up the questions, or potentially wrap up, I've got Councillor Osler, I've got Councillor Mowat, and I'm not sure if we've got anybody else that wishes to ask questions before we actually discuss this important application.
Thank you very much, Convener. Thank you very much indeed for a very detailed presentation. Moving away from trees, I just would like to sort of just drill down a bit about disabled access. A lot was mentioned about it earlier. From the understanding of what's actually been developed from the outside, from the lower levels and bits and pieces, I'd like to have a little bit of an understanding of how this is going to become better and more accessible for individuals.
My understanding is that this application has carefully considered the gradients of the paths. There's a very developed network of paths which exist that don't work terribly well for people with buggies or people in wheelchairs or people who have mobility issues. So we, through this process, we have sought to redress that by looking at the gradients for the paths and the gradients for the banks. There will be improved lift provision within the building, but my understanding is you would be able to enter from Princes Street Gardens and go through the new precinct next to the John Wilson statue and then down through the path to the new gardens entrance. But the existing stairs that we're looking at underneath the marker will not be, there will be no platform lift or anything at that stage. You will have to go down through the path network, but that will be improved. Yeah.
Can I just confirm, are they changing the gradients of that path that you see in the left of the slide?
Yes, to the left of that, though, this is I've just got the drawing here, actually. It's basically creating a long ramp that brings you down at the correct gradients. It's one of the reasons for the loss of the trees, actually, because it's right where the trees are.
I think that answers also, that's an important point. It also answers an issue that Councillor Mowat had raised about the accessibility of the paths and so on. So that's good to confirm that, because I'm aware the current gradient is quite steep for buggies and wheelchairs and so on.
Sorry, I just wanted to then obviously confirm the fact that obviously when we look at the space that's now become available, consideration is taken the fact that obviously we're trying to reduce the amount of street clutter. So when we put informative conditions in, that there's an understanding of the fact that this is accessible space, that this isn't just a sort of terrace to put tables and chairs on to increase licensing business. You know, there has to be an understanding that if we're going to give up part of, you know, the green space and terrace, that there has to be an understanding that part of it is for the ability to allow people to move freely through it.
One of the other things we did at the top of the steps was, if you go there now, there's a large bin that's right in the way. So that sort of thing has been moved out of the way. So the whole thing has been rationalised and simplified.
I think the informative or potentially condition that is subject to licensing and so on would obviously planning consent is at a moment in time, and that, I think you're absolutely right. We need to continue to ensure that there is good access and that this space does not become a commercially cluttered space, but is a foredrop to an important set of buildings. So, Councillor Mowat, your question.
Yeah, it sort of continues on quite neatly from that. Because it's about where the signage and who's going to control the signage in the gardens to it. If you're talking about taking 3/4 of your visitors from the platform at the bottom, logically you go, there's a building over there, I'm going to walk to the building over there. How do you take people from there down there without cluttering? I mean, I have to say that there's a bit of an own goal in that picture in front of us. Scottish National Gallery is actually blocking out half of the gallery because of, and there's a visibility issue. I'm not comfortable with that sign. It's probably the bit that I worry most about. But also that whole of the Mound precinct. Where's the sign? You know, who's in control of that signage strategy? What's it going to look like? And also, what are the materials and what's happening on that Mound precinct? Because at the moment, we've got real issues with big things going up and breaking the concrete. Now, it's not actually our concrete because it's done by the Scottish Government, I believe. But there's an issue about whether what is on there is fit for purpose, and longer term, how does that protect the gallery? Now, that's really the gallery's issue, but it feeds into this overall use of the space and who's controlling that and who's signing people into place.
One part of your question I'll answer and I'll leave the rest down. The sign itself, the Scottish National Gallery, both of us had concerns about the scale of that sign. So we've actually agreed to the concept of having a plinth, but we want it to become more elegant, if you like, and discussing how the signage underneath should point people to going to the right direction. So that's been conditioned, actually, specifically, because we agree with you. We weren't happy about that signage.
Okay. Hello, I have the wording of the appropriate condition here. It's condition 11. It's informative 11. Condition 11. Details of the final design of the proposed markers shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the planning authority before work is commenced on site. We had extended conversations regarding whether this was appropriate for this site, how large it should be, what material it should be, throughout the design process. The existing scale of the stone marker at this northern entrance approximates to the height of the plinth of the John Wilson statue, which is nearby. The new marker at the southern end of the site is smaller, but we wanted to have control about exactly what this looked like in the end.
Can I ask whether we'd also consider putting in a condition that the details of the wayfinding strategy in the wider site comes back to the head of planning for conditions? It strikes me there's quite a lot you could do. You're doing works to paths, you're doing works to show people the way. And actually, if we thought about that quite creatively, we could use the paths to take people there where we're redoing them, so we wouldn't have a lot of visual clutterage on the surface, but it might be that the paths are subtly different to take people into the centre. Now, I appreciate that needs to be assessed for because of the delicacy of the sensitivity of the landscape, but there's a choice between lots of markers going over there and, you know, follow your way this way. So I just wonder if maybe committee and debate would like to consider whether we condition that to come back.
Hello. I understand that one of my colleagues in planning is involved in the wayfinding scheme, and I would quite happily engage her in any further developments. What we didn't want to happen is to restrict the signage to be so small as to not to be effective, and then for the galleries to have a series of posters and banners, etc. So it's getting the balance right, but I agree that the wayfinding scheme may be an acceptable solution.
Having known Gareth Hoskins, he was never keen on banners, so I think I think it's a good point that you make, and they are fundamentally our gardens, and so we've got a slightly different view, or bigger view, should I say, than the galleries. So it's anything that's brought to us should work for the whole garden and not just for the gallery access, because we have to protect this important Arcadian space and ensure good access as well and avoid posters and so on. Can I just ask you to go back to the other slide that's seeing this Scottish National Gallery thing from the other side, from the Mound side? So I do take the point, maybe it is quite high, but it's trying to draw people in from the quite busy area at the street level and indicate there is a route through there. So we need to see a bit more detail about how they're going to work it and that we're comfortable, or that the officers are comfortable with it. But it's kind of a marker to pull people down that side as well, I think. So that's probably why it appears higher on the other side. So let's see what they come back with that potential condition if committee approves it. I wonder if there's any more questions, or we're now kind of getting to the point where we're discussing the proposal. Councillor Booth, a quick one then, please, because I know time is marching on.
I suspect I know the answer to this question, but this might just be a yes or no. I understand that there's a separate council process going through the Finance Committee about transferring the land, because obviously the land is inalienable common good. Just want to confirm that's entirely separate and irrespective of whether or not we grant planning permission today.
I understand this process is still ongoing. I'm not sure of the current status of that, but it is a conversation I've had with the previous application, and a previous colleague was involved more with this process. But it is a consideration, yes.
Could you confirm to Councillor Booth's point that land ownership is quite separate to planning consent? You don't have to own that land. So by granting, should we choose to, we're not compromising those if we're not in a comfortable position to grant the ownership issue. That is the correct. Yeah, thank you. On mic. Okay, we've heard a lot. It's a very important site in the city. To kick off, I feel slightly uncomfortable with the John Miller 2004 design, which has set the ball rolling here. And I feel actually more comfortable with the PSA 1975 design, where the gallery kind of floats above the garden. But that was built for a different purpose, really, in a different context. And given that the John Miller thing is not only granted, it's built and it's having a big impact on the gardens, and the two quite different designs, the idea of having a floating thing in Arcadia and being quite subtle, and the Western Wing look very incongruous currently. I think that this design mitigates between the two, because it is a fait accompli that the Western Wing is there already, and the context of the gardens and the idea that the galleries being on top of a grass bank, the mound has already changed, the horse has bolted. So although I have some reservations about the elevational treatment, the other thing was designed for a different purpose. So I'm not in any way advocating that we keep the bronze 1975 thing, although it was more subtle, perhaps. It had a subtlety about it, and I asked that the scheme from 2016 be displayed, because in retracting, because I think it's to do with technical issues, but in retracting from the 2016 consent that is granted, I think it improves it a wee bit, because it keeps it gives more of a grass bank, and so it moves back slightly more towards where the PSA thing was. But actually, the PSA thing, because of the John Miller thing, is no longer congruent. So therefore, the scheme kind of I don't know if you understand my train of thought, but it mitigates in some way the two things. Maybe actually, just for the committee, you could show the elevation first of the PSA and John Miller, and the elevation of what we're seeing today. It might make the point I'm trying to get at a little bit clearer. So there you see on the left you see the PSA and the John Miller thing, which is the John Miller scheme makes it much more of a building in a base, a podium, whereas the PSA is makes the National Gallery on the left float above the park in Arcadia. And then if you can now move to what we're seeing today, the actual application, please. The next slide. So what we're being asked to approve today mitigates a wee bit. It joins onto the Miller scheme, but recesses it a wee bit by necessity. But I think that's better in a way that there is some of the grass retained. So it works with quite a difficult situation and does its best to overcome that. The whole entrance sequence for the Western Wing isn't working well, and that's one of the reasons why this scheme's coming to the table, to improve disabled access and to improve parents with buggies and so on, which it's quite difficult to get down there. And as a general wayfinding strategy, which Councillor Mowat mentioned, I think that's beneficial, but we do need to resolve the details of that. So I'd be very happy that that is conditioned, and also I'd be very happy that how that space in front of the Western Wing is used as conditioned and continues to be licensed, because we don't want necessarily to see a lot of for example, umbrellas or anything like that, you know, and it becomes effectively a beer garden in the park. It must be restrained and subtle, and the whole point of the thing is to make a clear entrance into the galleries, so it shouldn't get in the way of that objective of this consent. So, on balance, I think that there. I had some reservations. I've stated them, but on balance, I think that I personally can support this scheme as it is. But and I do appreciate there's concerns about removal of trees. But I'm happy that this is being done as part of an overall landscape strategy for the gardens, which the City Council must remain in control of, and that the galleries are an important part of the garden landscape, but we have control and responsibility for maintaining the whole valley and the wooded nature of it and the views through, etc. So with that, I'm seeing one or two hands quite rightly, so I'm going to go Councillor Osler, Councillor Booth, Councillor Mowat, and then I'll come back for more questions after that. So Councillor Osler, or sorry, more debate after that, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Convener. I'm delighted the fact that the consideration for disabled access has been considered very greatly in this. It's really, really fundamentally important that obviously with a modern approach towards something that we incorporate as much accessibility as possible. And it's phenomenally difficult in sort of buildings like this and so on. It's also a really difficult area, you know, as we well know, during festival season, things like that, it's a really crowded and very, very, very heavily accessed area. We have to find a better way of actually allowing freedom of movement around this incredibly congested site. I do have a concern regarding the sort of the use of common use land and sort of the terracing aspect of it. I appreciate that this is be sort of dealt with under another committee, etc., like that. And I do worry slightly of what will be the usage of that terraced area and how we can actually make sure that it remains accessible. And again, along with the trees and bits and pieces, I understand fully why they have been taken out. And I know you've worked extremely hard to retain the sense of what the actual sort of the avenue ways are supposed to be like, etc., to retain the same flavour. And I applaud our teams who looked into this. So basically, I think they've come forward a very, very strong proposal, and I again would very strongly support it in its entirety.
Thanks, Convener. I would agree with nearly everything that you said. I think the only area that I would differ is your final comment that you feel the current conditions as set out in the report are sufficient. There was a considerable discussion about trees. I mean, it seems to me fairly clear that as the proposal stands, it's contrary to Environment 12, which reads that development will not be permitted if likely to have a damaging impact on a tree protected by a tree preservation order or on any other tree or woodland worthy of retention unless necessary for good arboricultural reasons. Now, we've already identified in the report that these are worthy of retention, these trees. The Policy Environment 12 goes on. Where such permission is granted, replacement planting of appropriate species and numbers will be required to offset the loss to amenity. Now, what I'm suggesting doesn't actually even go as far as Environment 12. I'm not suggesting that we require replacement planting. What I'm suggesting is that we encourage the developer to discuss replacement planting with our officers, and if mutually agreed that is appropriate, then that is done. So I think overall the application is a very strong one, and I think it's notable that there were no objections at all, not from any of the conservation bodies, to the application itself. But I do think we need to be cognizant of the fact that there is substantial loss of trees, and we need to ask the applicant, in very close cooperation with the Council, to consider replacement planting. So what I'm asking for is an informative that would add that.
Yes, I think that the Vice Convener, myself, and other committee members are happy with that, and I'm encouraged that there is this landscape plan, and to put that in the very good hands of our landscape architect is reassuring for me. So I think the city needs to be in control of the tree management, and if we require extra samples to be planted as part of a plan, then so be it, and the developer should be encouraged to comply with through an informative. Was it Councillor Mowat next? Thank you.
Yeah, I think you highlighted in your contribution, Convener, that the different role that the original PSA link, which was put in, which was to provide offices in a way that sort of disappeared, hence you got slightly disturbing floating building. I find it slightly disturbing when buildings float. I feel that I've moved from the solidity of Edinburgh, in a city built on a volcano, to somewhere less substantial. So I think, given that there is an aspiration here to improve the entrance and the flow through the galleries and to deal with the woefully awful Scottish galleries that were currently in the museum, in the galleries, which I have to say I have been to, but I don't go to very often, because it is like sort of taking a piece of string and getting lost in the building. But to expose that and to have a better display by moving what was office space and turning that into gallery space, it does require a different treatment. I think what they've come here, whilst I did support the 2016 iteration, I'm quite pleased that it has been pulled back, because I think that is a better and more comfortable solution. We have conditioned the issue that the space that will be allowed for licensed premises, that will be come back to the council for permissions, which I think will deal with those concerns about having a beer garden adjacent to this part of town. And no doubt it will be a pleasant area, but the gallery is quite clear. I think this is about access and improving the access, which is helpful. I think I can live with the informative on the trees. I'm never entirely sure why we put informatives on to ask officers to go and have a nice conversation with someone, because actually the landscaping strategy comes back. There were moments earlier today when I was getting slightly concerned, because I think what we have to understand is that this was built as a designed landscape, and that where the trees go have been very carefully placed when that was originally designed. I think we may have slightly lost sight of that, as you can see from the images in the intervening periods. About there's probably been different views about whether the tree or the building should be more prominent, but it's one of those really important landscapes to Edinburgh from the point of view of someone went out, put a building on, had a castle, had a picturesque landscape. There are really few areas in the world where you can see these amazing products of the Enlightenment mind still in their physical form today. And this is one of them, along with actually the Royal High School is the other one. So it's a really, really internationally and world precious bit of landscape. So I'm satisfied that we've managed that reasonably well, and that informative, that we're not going to suddenly stick a huge hole moat just in front, just because that would be sort of rather against what we're trying to do and what the original architects were trying to do. So I think we've now got a reasonable scheme which will improve access, as every gallery, every good gallery that people want to visit around the world is struggling with at the moment. And I hope that with that additional condition, if you'll agree to it with the wayfinding, we can also allow that to sit comfortably in our very special landscape and improve the experience without making it too much. Here is the museum.
Thank you for that contribution. Yes, I mean, the PSA 75 scheme, it's probably not very popular at the moment, but it was built for sort of office-type accommodation, so it's no longer required. You know, its function has changed, so it would be inappropriate to bind that to any new solution. And in a way, one can never read somebody's mind long since gone. But Playfair, I went to the exhibition at the City Arts Centre, and there was originally proposals for some sort of arcaded space on the mounds, and maybe this slightly understated scheme that's now come forward reflects perhaps something of what Playfair saw the mound to be. The gardens themselves, in terms of landscaping, they have evolved over time. They will continue to evolve, but it's important that we do remain in control of that and are able to license it as we see fit as a city, and that others shouldn't that they should take cognizance of our overall view. Alex, did you have a final?
I was just saying that I would support Councillor Booth's informative. I would say that this question, there are two things to consider when it comes to the trees here, and that is that yes, it is a landscaped area, but that also citywide we are seeing our tree stocks dwindle. That there are fewer trees in the city than there were 5 years ago, and that citywide we should look to reverse that, and that this informative moves towards that as well. So while we do need to consider the landscaped area, I very much support Councillor Booth's informative. I think looking at the citywide issues, it is crucial to try and keep as many trees as we can.
Councillor Booth, can you just clarify your informative? Because I think the committee is very much coming towards a clearer consensus opinion, bar what you're trying to achieve here. And then if you can just clarify that, and the committee can make a decision to whether to include that with its decision.
Thanks, Commissioner. So perhaps I might get some feedback from officers here on my proposed wording of the informative, which is that replacement planting of appropriate species and numbers will be discussed with council officers in the wider Princes Street Gardens. As part of the management plan.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. I'm happy with that. It could have a positive effect on the position. So if there's no further...
Yeah, I mean, I think that'll be fine. I've sort of draft wording of applicant is encouraged to consider the provision of replacement planting of appropriate species and numbers within the wider Princes Street Gardens in consultation with the planning authority. Numbers as part of the management plan in consultation. That's.
I'm just looking at the informative for the licensing. What number was that again, please? And I'm wondering whether that should be a condition, because it is something that 11. Thank you. So can councillors have a look at that one? Before development takes place, the applicant shall provide details of a clearly delineated space to be identified in which tables and chairs to the gallery's cafe operations can be placed to allow management of the space for diners and pedestrians accessing the area. I think that can be a condition. Are officers content that could be a condition rather than an informative?
Yeah, I think it could be a condition. Do you want to give further consideration? What's the purpose of the condition? When we put conditions into applications, we give a clear indication as to the reason.
Councillor Marrett.
Can I suggest that the purpose of the condition is to maintain the majority of the space for the enjoyment of access and the amenity of enhancing the amenity of the gardens, whilst also allowing the provision of some public space outside, but it's to maintain the access to the gardens for those who are, it's to maintain amenity for access of the gardens.
Indeed, and to, I'm not sure of the wording, but to take cognizance of the building, so that this would not dominate the building. Anything that goes in there is subsidiary, and so it's not going to dominate views of what we're trying to achieve is more people to use the Western Wing access, so it's some wording along those lines would be helpful, I think, along with all that Councillor Marrett suggested there.
Read it back to you.
Sorry, the Vice Conveners helpfully also just said, is the wayfinding attached to a separate condition, or should we bring it into this one?
First of all, so turn informative 11 into condition, and the reason for the condition to ensure proposals maintain adequate pedestrian access to the gardens and have a satisfactory impact on the building. Is that the...
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Trying to sum up and keep it. It's a separate regime, so it's a... Yeah, that's part of what the requirements are under their licensing legislation. Table and chairs, what if they put umbrellas? How do they do?
The aesthetic side of how much emphasis licensing puts onto the visual appearance of things. So it could have a strong visual impact.
Yes, sorry, it appears to be a little bit of a grey area because unless they're attached to something, they wouldn't need listed building consent, but it would affect the setting of a listed building if they were to erect large canopies or umbrellas. They would need some kind of formal consent, I think.
So is there any way that we can link that to a condition that obviously we don't want to come back to committee, that's not the purpose of the planning committee, but to protect the city's position? Is it reasonable to have some sort of condition in there?
My thoughts would be that we've got the conditions on this one. We basically need to monitor what happens, and if proposals come forward that require us to require a list of building consent or require planning permission, then we would. There's processes for doing that, but I think we're trying to attach the unknown, conditions to the unknown, because we don't know what proposals are coming forward. So it's difficult to do at this stage. I don't know the details of it, but generally the ownership of the land isn't a planning consideration, so it's a different.
Understood, but Councillor Booth mentioned transfer of some of the common good land. I'm not sure if that's still pertinent, although it's not a planning matter, but whether it's still pertinent to the building of this project. And if that were the case, maybe that committee could consider limiting use of the land in ways, the way that land is used might take on board these considerations. I'm just a bit concerned that we end up with lots of umbrellas and things like that and are unable to control them, and it would have a significant impact on the archaic nature of the gardens as a restful place.
I think you have to remember, convener, that you can only deal with matters that are planning issues. You cannot try and influence another regime and try and force them into a decision based on a planning issue. They will make their own decisions based on their own legislation.
Thank you for that, Stephen. And I do understand the limits, and it's falling between two stools sometimes. Okay, well, if there's nothing we can do there, Alison.
Yeah, I was just not able to comment at this stage. It would be something that we would have to look at. But it sounds as if it's beyond the remits of what we have to determine as part of this application.
Given that we're not giving up the space, we do have an opportunity to lobby councillors on that committee, for licensing committee, and I'm sure our citizens will potentially be doing that as well. So we're not actually giving up control of the space, it's just a different committee that will be dealing with it. So wayfinding was the next one. That's another important consideration. So Alison, can you give that some thought and run that by committee?
It'd be helpful just to get some clarification when you're talking wayfinding strategy. Is this the council's wider wayfinding work, or is it specific for this area? Just a bit
I suppose what we're looking for, well, what I think would be important is that they use ways of directing the wayfinding. There is their own wayfinding strategy. In my ideal world, it would sort of segue neatly into the wider wayfinding strategy, so you don't have something over here and something over there and a clash of styles and designs. But I think it's more about, in this particular application, to think about how they can guide people to their downstairs without, you know, lots of signs on trees or lots of signs, and so that's using, you know, is there a way that they can look at how they do the paving? It's to incorporate that into the wider design of the site, so that it's not added on as an extra layer. So really, they're doing the paving, they're doing that, they're doing lots of works to paths. How does that tell us, at the same time as improving that gradient, can you make it clear you're coming from over there, you've seen that big sign, oh, I'm pushing a buggy, that's how I get down there, just to make that available. And there's lots of ways you can do it without having a site, without having lots of signs. And I think in something that's this major into intervention, it would be something that it would be helpful for our officers to come back and look at that to check that that's working.
So thank you for that. So I'm wondering if it's a comprehensive wayfinding strategy to the satisfaction of the Chief Planning Officer that takes cognizance of the wider landscape and management plan for the park. And so it would be a design-based strategy to avoid unnecessary clutter.
We have a general condition, which was a sort of cover-all, saying planning and landscaping details should be discussed and developed with parks and green space prior to submission. And that's because of the issues about not being 100% happy with some of the railing design and the size of the wayfinding. So, I mean, we could add that in, whether we want to specify it or whether we know that obviously we need to be very, very clear. As you say, you could put things horizontally as opposed to vertically to actually get people to the doors. I don't know.
That's actually an informative at the moment.
Yes. I thought it was a condition.
I would be happy, subject to officers' advice, of course, for that to become a condition and to incorporate what myself and Councillor Mowat have suggested, to really beef that up, because there can be scope creep here, or people make short-term decisions for the right reasons, but it then has a bigger impact, and so therefore it should be part of a managed process, a design-led process, and it should be minimal yet effective.
Sorry, my mistake. The condition was that was the informative. The condition is a fully detailed landscape plan, including details of all hard and soft surface and boundary treatments and all planting. So it was a big catch-all.
I think if you include a bit about wayfinding just in that additional comment that amplifies that condition, just to stick it in so we know we're looking for them to do that.
Yeah, I would be most happy with that. I don't want to lose sight of that. So with that, I'm happy to move this one if everyone else is in agreement. And the Vice Convener.
We need to do.
Do you want your mic?
Yep, happy to second.
Thank you.
No challenge. Okay, that'll be approved with the additional informatives amendment to the condition and the new condition. I was going to say, yeah, take a 5-minute break, convener. Mindful that we have to be out of this room by the latest about 2:20, and we have a lot of stuff to
Sorry, can I just ask that the decision clarifies exactly which informatives and conditions, because we've had problems in the past where the translation of what committee attended in discussion didn't make it into the minutes. So just to be clear, an additional informative in relation to the replacement tree planting, informative 11 to become a condition, and with the reason to ensure proposals maintain access to the gardens and in relation to the impact on the building, and that we include reference to wider wayfinding in condition 7. about the detailed landscaping plan. Is that what everybody?
Yes. And in terms of the agenda going forward, I'll speak to the officers because there might be some things that need to be dealt with of a higher priority in terms of timelines, so we'll take cognizance of that. And so we are, Stephen's brought to my attention that we are time limited, and so we may not get through the full agenda, but hopefully we do. But we should deal with the things that are most imperative in terms of timelines. Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute break now. So
can you clarify
can
that
you
you've
clarify you're granting both applications?
Yeah, you need to. Do you need? And can you do those decisions separately, please?
Yeah. Yes. So the committee agree to grant both the planning and listed building consents.
But the listed building consent is as officer recommendation. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.